Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Ian Scott, and I am the founder of Scott Legal. And today we are going to spend some time talking about the various different types of investor visas. So a few things before we get started. Scott Legal is a full-service immigration law firm, but we do focus on investor visas, and that's in particular because the firm was actually founded on one of the investor visas that we plan on speaking about today, an E2 visa. In terms of a couple of housekeeping items before we jump into the presentation, a few things that we will send to you after the presentation. We will send you a copy of this PowerPoint presentation that we're going to go through. The PowerPoint presentation actually has quite a bit of detail on it, so it could be useful to you. We'll send you also a number of our guides, so all of the different areas that we're talking about today. We have guides, comprehensive guides that go through these particular types of visas in detail, and we will send you links to those guides so you can download them. We will also send you a link to future webinars. We regularly have webinars at least 2 a month, and often more than that. I believe this month we've had 4 already, and we will continue to do them. And then finally, this webinar is actually being recorded, so we do turn the webinar into a YouTube video afterwards, and we will send you a link to that YouTube video. If you have to jump off for some reason or you want to watch it later, it will be available for you to do that. And again, my name is Ian Scott, and we are going to jump right into the presentation. So when as I mentioned, the presentation today is about investor visas, and we're really going to focus on 4 different types of investor visas, the ones that you see listed on this slide: the E2 visa, the National Interest Waiver for entrepreneurs, which is a green card, the International Entrepreneur Rule, which is a relatively new program. I'll explain that when we get to it, and then the EB5, which is another type of investor green card, investor option, which is a green card. So a lot of the time when West immigration attorneys use the term visa, we are using the term visa and green card interchangeably, in that a green card is a type of visa, and often that's how we refer to it. So let us just run through each of these requirements one by one. So the first one we're going to start with is the E2 visa, and this it's a great option for entrepreneurs. It's a great option for people who want to start a business in the U.S., people who want to purchase a business that's already existing in the U.S. Great option for both of those situations. Now, one problem with this visa, though, is that this particular visa is only available to nationals from certain countries. So there's a list of about 80 countries that are on the list of treaty countries, but unfortunately 2 of the most populous countries, being China and India, are not on the list. But lots of other countries are. Many countries in Europe are on the list. Australia is on the list. Canada, the United Kingdom, Pakistan. There are a number of countries on the list. But really, first and foremost, to even be considered for this particular visa, the entity that is in the U.S. has to at least be 50% owned by a national from the treaty country. So that is a threshold issue that we have to look for. And when we talk about nationality, we really are just talking about your passport. When we look at some visas or green cards, we do see that country of birth is relevant, but what's relevant is where you have your passport, and you could have a passport from multiple countries, and as long as one of those countries is an E2 treaty country, then you could be eligible for this particular visa. So the second aspect with respect to this visa is that you have to make an investment. So it is an investor visa, and it does require an investment. And the interesting thing about this particular visa is that the government, unlike some of the others that we're going to speak about, it doesn't set a specific amount that you have to invest. Instead, what they do is they look at a number of different factors, but primarily they look at the entity, and they make an assessment, or you would have to make the assessment of what it would cost to get that particular entity up and running. And that's what you would have to invest, in particular, if that total cost was under $300,000. If it cost much more to get the entity up and running, let's say a few $1,000,000, then you could invest less than the full amount to get the business up and running. In terms of the firm, we do a lot of E2 visas for, what we call kind of high risk cases, or cases that are a little riskier, which really are low investment amount, low dollar amount. We do a number of those different types of cases. And there is a slide where we talk about the investment amount in a little bit more detail to give you an idea of exactly what that requirement is, but we'll save that for when we get to that slide. In terms of the other kind of requirement of the E2 visa is that the funds have to be at risk. So what that means is that when you're talking about investment, that means money that you have actually spent rather than money that, for example, is just sitting in a business bank account. If the money's sitting in a business bank account, that's not going to be sufficient for the E2 visa. And really what's going to happen is the money is going to, you actually are going to have to spend that money to be able to qualify for an E2 visa. So some of the things that you'd spend the money on, equipment, you'd spend the money on furniture, maybe computers, staff, whatever it is really that you can spend the money on to get the business, or what's required to get the business up and running, is what you'd end up spending on. And as I said, we're going to talk about the investment that has to be substantial, and we're going to talk about exactly what that means. We talked a little bit about as well some of the E2 visa, the types of E2 visa expenditures. One that I didn't mention earlier was inventory. If you are setting up a business that does require inventory, then that's that can be a great expenditure. But really, as I said, really anything that's required to get the business up and running. So we talked about equipment, but also website, office supplies. If you're leasing premises, if you're paying for marketing, all of those things are relevant. With respect to, I mentioned at the beginning that an E2 visa can be obtained with, either starting a business, which, we do a lot of, but also purchasing a business. If someone wants to purchase a restaurant, for example, or an existing business, we tend to, if someone is looking to purchase an existing business, you want the business to be profitable and to have employees. So maybe to have equivalent of 3 full-time employees. And, one of the aspects that you can look at if you are purchasing a business is, instead of giving the seller all of the money up front, you can enter into an escrow arrangement. Now, some of these concepts I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but for each of these visas, we have separate webinars. So, hour long, sometimes hour and 15-minute long webinars on each of these topics. So definitely I encourage you to either go to our YouTube channel or sign up for one of those webinars. And, we do go into a lot more detail with respect to, for example, the E2 visa requirements. But every single one of the topics that we're going to speak about today, there is a separate webinar on them. The other aspect with respect to the E2 visa has to do with hiring employees. And similar to the investment amount, there is no set number of employees that you have to hire, but you do have to hire them. So generally, we say that if you're doing a startup, then within a 5-year period, you should look to hire at least the equivalent of 3 full-time employees. Similarly, if you're buying a business, you want to buy a business that does have the equivalent of 3 full-time workers there, and that's excluding family members. In terms of the E2 visa, one of the key questions that we often get asked is, is it enough to just intend to do something, or do I actually have to do it before I apply? And you do have to, unfortunately, it's unfortunate because it is a bit scary that you have to actually spend all this money and get the business up and running before you apply for the visa. So you don't even know if you're going to get the visa. But that being said, the approval rates for E2 visas are quite high. Our approval rate is closer to the 98% mark. Past results don't predict future outcome, but a lot of the time, if an E2 visa is structured well, you can significantly increase your chances of approval. They are fairly objective visas. The other aspect that is required for an E2 visa is that the person is coming to the U.S. to develop and direct the enterprise. So we look, how much does a person own? Typically, that they can meet the standard if they own 50% of the business, but then also that they have the experience to be able to run the business going forward. And then finally, this is a non-immigrant visa. It's not a green card, and it's not one of those visas that allows for what's called dual intent, and you do have to. But that being said, it is fairly permissive in the sense of you don't have to sell your home in your home country if you are getting this visa, and typically the government is going to be happy with you just signing a document that says that you plan to return on your country if and when you no longer have an E2 visa. So the next thing related to E2 visas that we talked about has to do with, how much it is that you invest. Now, this is an interesting question, and it's one of the key questions that we typically get when people are interested in applying for an E2 visa. And as I mentioned before, if you are doing a business startup, and the business startup, you're going to take a look at exactly what it costs to get that entity set up. So you can imagine if you're doing a service-oriented business, for example, the firm was founded on an E2 business, founded on an E2 visa, and it costs very little to start up the business. Really, one could argue that all you need is a computer and a desk, and that's enough to get the business started. However, the government is going to require that you spend, even for a service-oriented business that has low startup costs, that you spend some money. We recommend that you spend at least $40,000, and we have certainly done applications where the expenditure has been significantly less than that, but they are higher risk applications. And I think that one of the key takeaways with respect to the investment amount is, a lot of the time people want, what's the number? They keep asking, what's the number? What's the number? But there is no magic number. But I think instead, what the investment amount is going to depend on is, one thing that we talked about, the type of business, but also where you're applying. Some consulates are friendlier than others for lower investment amounts, and similarly examiners. But then also another significant factor with respect to how much you can invest, and how sometimes investing a lower amount might be satisfactory, is the overall strength of your case. If you have a case that is very strong, then you can invest less. We had a case where the person was a doctor, and she was providing these services for a common neurological disorder, and she had contracts from these insurance companies, and she invested, I think, maybe $15,000 or $20,000 maximum that she spent, and had another small amount of money in working capital. But we always thought, and it was a successful case without any issue, we always thought that that would still be a very, very strong case given the fact pattern. Everyone kind of recognizes with doctors' offices that they're going to be employees, etc., and that was the case here. One of the things that you can also do to assist a case, in particular in some consulates, is you can get a CPA letter that indicates that you have spent everything that is required for this particular type of business, and that can sometimes be helpful for some examiners. Franchises are great E2 visa options, so something to keep in mind. All consulates like franchises, and they're comfortable that most franchises are going to support hiring U.S. workers. And then, just another kind of, last point on expenditures and investment amount is, there are good E2 expenditures and ones that aren't so good. So, we don't typically include, for example, travel, meals, and entertainment, things like that. Whereas good E2 visa expenditures would be equipment, or rent, or paying money to employees. Those are much better E2 visa expenditures. We do include the legal fees in the E2 visa expenditures, but even legal fees, I'd say, are not as good an E2 expenditure as, for example, equipment and things that are just going to be, objectively directly related to the funding of the business. So the next visa category that we're going to talk about is a national interest waiver. And the national interest waiver, I think, is, it's a relatively new arrival or newcomer to the entrepreneur or investor visa world. And this is a green card. So keep in mind that this is a green card. So the reason it's a newcomer is because there was a famous case that was decided at the end of 2016. And really, this case didn't get a lot of traction until probably 2018. As it was tested out a little bit in 2017 and 2018 with cases that went to the Board of Immigration Appeals, so they could refine what the standard meant. And really what the case talked about was this category being applicable to entrepreneurs. So it's a category that we typically use now, and we've applied for a number of people who were on E2s to move to national interest waiver. Now I'm going to break the discussion into a couple of areas. So the first area is just kind of the threshold requirement with EB2, and there's a lot of detail on the slide, and I'm going to go through it quickly. And as I said, we have separate presentation on national interest waiver. But the first thing you have to look at before you even consider a national interest waiver is whether you meet the threshold requirement. So national interest waiver falls under the EB2 category. So green cards, employment-based green cards are broken down from EB1 to EB5. And this EB2 category is the same EB2 that would be used if an employer wanted to sponsor you for a green card. So this has nothing to do, this piece of it has nothing to do with the national interest waiver case, but it's a threshold requirement that you need before you even consider moving to the next step. So the threshold requirement is that you need either an advanced degree or its equivalent. So it's defined. So advanced degree is a master's degree or higher. It doesn't have to be from the US, but master's degree or higher, or the equivalent, which is a bachelor's degree plus 5 years of post-bachelor progressive work experience. So it's that. So if you have that, either of those two things, you can move straight to point B. But let's say that you don't have a degree. Let's say you never went to college or university. Then you can meet this threshold requirement by proving that you have exceptional ability. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through all of the exceptional ability criteria, but they're listed there. And if you meet 3 of those particular criteria, then even without a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, you may still be able to qualify under the EB2 category. Now, but remember, these are just the threshold requirements. So that means that if you can meet these, then you move to, step 2. And what is step 2? So step 2 is really looking at the case. The case is called Danisar, and it's looking at the case in terms of, what's required for the national interest waiver. So the first part of this case deals with that you have to prove that the endeavor that you are undertaking has both substantial merit and national importance, right? So, we've done, or I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about a kind of a famous case that was decided with respect to this that kind of apply these criteria. The second is that you're well positioned to advance the endeavor. And the third is that on balance that, the government should give this to you because there is a whole labor certification process that looks for qualified US workers. And so you're presenting a lot of evidence there to show that on balance, the government should give that to you. So how does it work when we're looking at it for entrepreneurs? So when we're looking at the national interest, for example, and substantial merit, sometimes what we can use is that the economic activity. So we can say that job creation is a factor. We can say let's say for example there's an economically depressed area, and this particular endeavor is going to benefit that particular area. That's something that we can use. Typically, we like to use that in conjunction with something else. So if the business is doing something or making something or providing some type of service, we do like to focus on that particular service or particular product as being in the national interest as well, and then also relying on job creation. But to the extent that the job creation was going to be significant, that could that in itself could be enough for Danisar. And we could you can get an economist report, like you could look at the business plan, get an economist report. And keep in mind that this first prong is just it's independent of the kind of ability to get anything done, right? It's looking at it is the endeavor of separating it from the individual at this point. Is the endeavor one that is in the national interest? So that's the kind of analysis that you're doing there. And then it moves to the individual. And when it moves to the individual, we now say that, is the person well positioned to advance the endeavor? And then you're going to look at a number of different things. You're going to look at their educational background. You're going to look at their track record. You're going to look at how far along is the particular endeavor? Does it have funding? Have other people invested in it? Does the person have patents? Do they have letters from others that say that this is going to be something that's going to be successful? um, yeah, so and that's something that can all of those things are things that can show that the person's well positioned to advance the endeavor. But it does have to be very, very specific, and often that well positioned to advance the endeavor can be a very, very difficult prong to overcome in the national interest waiver analysis. The other piece of this analysis is that you have to prove on balance that the person's entitled to kind of go past the labor certification process. So we often use a little bit of everything here. We kind of talk about, we sometimes go back to the EB1 extraordinary ability criteria, and we point to different exceptional or extraordinary aspects of the individual. But then also, when we're looking at entrepreneurs, we do tend to make the argument that this prong is not even applicable, because the entrepreneurs can't sponsor themselves for a green card. So we kind of say that this particular prong isn't applicable. So we do, we include a number of things in this particular prong, but I think one of the key arguments that we make here is that prongs 1 and 2 are really the ones that are applicable. So, I think what's interesting here is an example, and this was an example of someone who applied for a national interest waiver and then was denied, and then they sued the U.S. government, and then they was approved, right? So it was someone who was an applicant who started a consulting company, and the focus was on providing services to U.S. vets, right? So what the person said was that this was of national importance, that vets often go to combat and come back and don't have these services, et cetera. And, and then we list out some of the things that the person included. They included letters from experts, leaders in the military, government, business, charitable institutions, news articles, evidence of the federal government's own initiatives. And, basically just independent of the person, showing that this is of national importance, right? This is an area of national importance. And then in terms of showing that the person was well positioned to advance the endeavor, the person had a lot of contracts with different government agencies. It said that they were going to refer these people, et cetera. And we list out some of the information that was included. A comprehensive business plan was included, description of the services that were going to be offered, and emails and letters from prospective clients confirming the interest. So all of those things really go a long way to show that the person's well positioned to advance the endeavor, and that's really what the government is looking for. And then I've talked about already the on balance, that it's beneficial to waive the requirement. So that's we talked about that already. So now we're moving to the next investor visa option. And this particular visa option, I refer to it at the beginning of the presentation as relatively new, right? And when I say relatively new, it's an interesting one, because this particular area was introduced during the Obama administration, and then it was introduced closer to the end of the Obama administration. And then the new administration came in after that and really scrapped the program and didn't really do much with it. And so because of that, I think there'd only been kind of one approval in this program. But then when the Biden administration came in a year and a bit ago, they revitalized the program, and now it's available again. So it's a program that, one of the great things about this program is that, unlike the E2 that has a nationality requirement, anyone can apply for this program, and it has pretty simple basic requirements. And it's a status that can be issued for 30 months. The criteria there are listed. You have to own 10% of the company. Has to be a relatively new company, 5 years or less, and then you have to have a qualifying investor. So it can't just be anyone. It can't be a friend, family member, et cetera, but a qualifying investor that's invested at least 264,000. And that number is scaled. It used to be, I think, 225 or 250. It used to be 250, and it's scaled based on inflation. So the number is going to keep on going up. But even if this particular category doesn't require that the individual invest anything, right? So it can be others who believe in the person, and then it can be renewed. The renewal criteria are similar. The other thing to kind of keep in mind is that even if they don't get the investment requirement, they can still they can still apply for this because they can then look at a much more holistic analysis. And this particular holistic analysis reminds me a lot of the national interest waiver analysis that's done, basically to show that that there's a compelling reason why this person should get the particular benefit. And you're going to be looking at the same types of things, like the fact that this particular endeavor is going to create jobs, and providing evidence that the endeavor is going to be profitable and beneficial to the U.S. economy. And there's some additional things listed here in terms of that you can focus on for that particular analysis. But definitely, I'd say that if one was eligible for the E2 and eligible for advanced parole, I'd say most times the E2 is going to be a better option for them, just given this parole status. There's a completely separate webinar on this particular program, but the parole status is not nearly as good as the an actual visa, and I think that definitely in those other webinars, we spend a bit more time explaining that. But I think it's a great addition to the option investor visa options, because it E2, there's just a large number of people in the world that are not eligible for E2 just based on the nationality requirement. So, and then the final investor visa that we're going to talk about is the EB5. And this particular visa, unlike the E2, has very specific number requirements in terms of investment and jobs. So first, before we dive into EB5 requirements, let me just talk about the program overview and some of the changes. So the EB5 program is really broken out into two areas. So the first area of the EB5 program is regional center. So that's where you take money, like $500,000, and you give it to someone else who's, like, for example, building a hotel or something like that. And you give them the money, and they take the money and they create the jobs that are required. So you're very much a passive investor, and then hopefully in time you get your money back and you get your green card, right? So that's the EB5 passive investor route. But what we're seeing a lot of, and what we focus more on, is a direct investment. So someone can have a business, and they can invest either 500,000 or $1 million in that particular business, and then try and meet the requirements of creating the 10 full-time jobs themselves. And we do a lot of E2s to EB5s as well, based on the original existing E2 business. So now, with respect to this particular program, during the last administration, the investment amount went up from, instead of being 500,000 for the lower end, it went up to 900,000. Instead of being 1 million for the high end, it went up to 1.8 million. But then someone sued the government, or a group of people sued the government, and the courts agreed that the administration didn't have the authority to increase the investment amount. So right now, the investment amounts are back down to 500,000 and $1 million. However, we expect that on March 11th, that the investment amounts will be increased, but not to the old numbers. That we expect that they'll be increased to 700,000 on the low end, and then 850,000 on the high end. So those, it remains to be seen exactly what will happen, but that's what we expect to happen in March, because the regional center program has been paused since last June. The direct investment program is still alive and well. If someone was investing today in the direct investment program, the investment amount would be 500,000 or $1 million. So but that's a little background on the EB5 program. So what is it? So, someone who wants to start a business in the US or invest in a business in the US, they would invest either $500,000 or $1 million in what's called a new commercial enterprise. It doesn't have to be a new enterprise. That can go back to an enterprise that was created, over 20 years ago. There's a specific date. But what determines whether or not it's 500,000 or $1 million is whether or not the business is in what's called a targeted employment area. So a targeted employment area is an area where the unemployment rate is 1.5 times the national average, or a rural area as defined by the jurisdiction. So that's what governs whether it's 500,000 or $1 million, or whatever the new amounts are. In terms of the investment, it's going to be, you can't just put money in a bank account similar to E2. You have to spend money, and then sometimes with EB5, they're a little particular on what you spend the money on. Like sometimes you can't do, like for example, you can't include administrative fees, so legal fees can't be included, where we normally do include those for E2. In terms of investment, it can be made over time. We have an EB5 direct case that we're doing where the investment was made over a 10-year period. So definitely it can be done over time. It doesn't have to be made all at once. And then just keep in mind that the investment is not retained earnings. So investment is your personal investment that you've invested in the business. It's not like if you started a business and the business made $1 million, that's not investment. Even if it was spent, that's not investment. Money that is your investment is your investment that you sitting in your personal bank account, and you're investing into the EB5 entity. So that's the other thing to keep in mind is that EB5 does not permit for someone to come in and buy another entity and give the money to the seller. So the money has to be invested in the actual entity. So it's very different from E2. If someone bought a restaurant for $500,000, that would easily qualify for E2, but it wouldn't qualify for EB5 because they would say the investment in that case is zero because the money actually went to the seller rather than into the business. The big thing with EB5 is source of funds. It is nothing like E2. So, it's very, very exacting. So the government spends an enormous amount of time kind of going through the source of, where the money came from. Often that's one of the largest parts of the file. So definitely something to keep in mind. This particular investment can't be a loan. It has to be some form of equity investment. Now, in terms of job creation, this as well is very different from the E2 because it is a specific number. It's 10 full-time jobs. So that's not part-time jobs, it's 10 full-time jobs. And so it's not equivalent, it's full-time. And also the people have to be green card holders or US citizens. They can't be, visa holders or other people who are authorized to work in the US. But, they have to be full-time jobs that are citizens or green card holders. This particular EB5 requires a very detailed business plan, probably more so than the E2. But then the other big thing is that the investment has to be linked to job creation. So let's say that you invested in a business that already had 5 full-time workers, and then you invested in the business. You would have to create 10 new jobs in that case because the 500,000 that you invested in the business didn't have anything to do with the hiring of those 5 original people. So there has to be a link towards the job creation. And it is quite an exercise documenting the full-time positions and qualified workers. This particular petition, it requires filing an I-526, and then you're going to do an I-485 or consular processing. And then after this particular petition gets approved, you have to then, after you've had the green card for a couple of years, you have to file another petition that shows that you actually did create the jobs, because you do have quite a bit of time. You have a couple of years after the I-526 petition has been approved to create the jobs. And the I-526 petitions are taking between 2 and 3 years to be approved. It's a tremendous backlog with respect to adjudication of I-526 petitions, unfortunately. So it's not for the faint in heart. So we have all the visas listed out here. Let's that we talked about. Let's kind of run through them and compare and contrast a little bit. We have the E2 visa, where it's a subjective investment amount, nothing specific. It's going to depend on the type of entity that you're starting and other factors in the case. No set job numbers. We like to have a number of kind of 3, but nothing specific. And it can be full-time equivalents. It can be a combination of positions, and really no specific focus or no specific requirement that the workers have to be green card holders or US citizen. I think it's better if they are, but better for your application if they are, but certainly we would include any employment as long as the person was authorized to work in the United States. And then of course we said this is only for certain countries. For National Interest Waiver, definitely a very, very up and coming investor visa option that we're doing a lot of National Interest Waiver, so it's definitely one that I encourage you to sign up for the National Interest Waiver webinar that we webinars that we have, and one I believe is specific to National Interest Waivers for entrepreneurs, and I think it's definitely going to be worthwhile. International Entrepreneur Rule, if you're not eligible for some of the other programs, this is definitely one to consider. Relatively new program, unclear what the processing time is going to be because there's no premium processing associated with this. Similarly, with the National Interest Waiver, right now there's no premium processing, but you're looking probably about a year for that to be approved. And then finally, EB-5 green card. And we talked about the recent changes to the program. It's 10 full-time employees, and it's a long wait. Like it's one of the biggest problems with the EB-5 program is just how long that you would have to wait in order to get an approval. It really is a long and drawn out process. Perfect. So those are the investor visa options. And I know that during the presentation, there were a number of questions. I didn't announce at the beginning, but you can, as we go through the questions, you can continue to add more questions into the chat or the Q&A box. So I'm just going to go through the questions now, read them out, and then answer them. Okay, I'm looking to buy an existing business for E2. Do I need to inform the seller about E2? If so, at what point of the process? So no, you don't ever have to inform. This is none of their business. If you're getting a visa, it might be that you have to, like if you want to do escrow, you would have to inform them because the escrow agreement is going to talk about the conditions, because the escrow agreement is one where you're saying that if the visa is approved, then the money goes to the seller, but if the visa is not approved, then it goes back to you. But other than that, there's no requirement to tell them anything. And anyone can buy a business in the US. You don't need a visa to do that. You only need a visa to work in the US. We have a Canada Inc. for IT consulting. Can we establish the same company in the US for E2? Finally, we'd like to get a green card. Can you compare paths from TN to green card or E2 to green card? Okay, so if you have an IT consulting business in your home country or any service business in your home country, sure, you can apply for an E2 or use, to set up something in the US that, where an E2 might be an option. I think the one thing to keep in mind is that when you're applying for an E2, one very big reason for denial of E2s is if someone has an existing company in their home country that's the same as what they want to open in the US and they don't have employees, because they think, well, the person has been doing it for a long time and they don't have employees, so why would they have employees when they come to the US? And it's all about jobs. So that's just something to keep in mind. In terms of green cards, what I'd encourage you to do is there's an actual webinar on E2 to green card. So, I encourage you to either search that out on our YouTube channel or sign up for the next one. I believe there's one coming up within the next little bit, because it's a whole webinar that takes an hour to explain the differences, different options to move from E2 to green card. Hi, Ian. I'm planning to purchase 50% of an already existing business on an E2. Its market value is estimated approximately 200,000, therefore 50%. Could 50% of this 100,000 come from a personal loan, and could the personal loan come from the seller of the business? So it's an interesting question, and with a clear answer. So this is a case where someone wants to buy a business, valued it, and it's because a few different things that come out in this question. So one, if you're buying a business from someone you don't know, there's no need to value the business other than for a business reason. There's no need for the E2, because the amount you pay for it is what it's worth. Because if you don't know the person, if it's family member, completely different, or if a friend, is completely different. But market value is what you paid for it. Now, so in this case, if they were asking 200,000 and you paid 100,000, that's no problem. You purchased 50% of the business and you could qualify. Now the question of, can you get a loan? Absolutely, you can get a loan, now, but the question is, can the personal loan come from the seller of the business? Absolutely not, right? So that the loan would have to come from. There's only one type of loan that's not permitted in E2, and that is when the business is the security. So government's not going to believe that you bought a business that you paid X, you paid X number of, you didn't pay anything. They're just going to think you didn't pay anything for it. If the seller is basically saying, buy half of my business and pay me later. Right. So I think that's not, and normally when they have that type of arrangement, the entity is securities, which they say, if you don't pay me, then the business is mine. And that's not, that doesn't work for an E2. Yeah, yes, I know the seller is a friend. So that's, that's not good. That's the government, the government's not going to think they're going to think it's not a valid transaction. I think that's what the problem is, that they're going to think it's not a valid transaction. Okay, so, and, just to kind of reiterate something, because we do have a little bit of time. So we had a case where the person was applying in Australia, and she was buying a gas station, a portion of a gas station, 50% from her brother-in-law. We warned her, said this could be an issue, get the company valued, and there still may be an issue. So she went and to the US consulate in Sydney, and she was approved. No problem. Then she went to renew 4 years later, because they get 4 years in Australia. So she went to renew, and when she went to renew, the officer raised the exact issue that we warned about and denied the case. Said that we just think it's money floating around family, and we don't believe there was ever a real transaction. And the officer said he should never have been approved in the first place, and denied the application. So when the people who are selling, it's you have to really be careful, and that in particular if they're relatives. Can you hear us, or do we just chat? So yeah, so no, I cannot hear you. All questions would be in the chat box. Can we register a company and apply for a visa 2 months after the company got registered? Is there a time component? Nope, you can, you can register a company and then apply for the visa whenever you want. I just think it's often good to apply within 6 months of opening the entity. Because if not, then the government might think, oh, well, you have this entity open, what were you doing, right? Is the E2 a dual intent visa? No, it's not, but it's as close to a dual intent visa as you can get, because it's one visa where the regulations are clear that you do not have to give up your home in your home country. So you don't have to maintain a home in your home country. So you can give up the home in your home country, and that's like for a B1, B2, they often look at that, right? So it's and that's specific in the regulations that you do not have to maintain a home. Can you register an LLC from outside the US? If so, how? Yes, you can. You can go to any website, State Department website, and each one has instructions of how to set up a business entity, and you would follow them. Can the investment come from within the US? Yes, no problem at all. There's no requirement for any of the visas that we talked about that the money comes from outside of the US. None whatsoever. It can all come from the US. Okay, someone sent an article. That's fine. Okay. We have Canadian Inc. Okay, we answered that question. If you apply for an EB2 and decline, can you move to an E2? You can, but it's a little like if you apply for an EB2 and you're declined, you signal to the US government that you're interested in a green card. So you do have to be careful with your subsequent non-dual intent visa applications. But we do have an article on this on our website, which is worth a read. So I think you definitely can, but it's I think it's something you have to be careful of. So a qualified investor is one who is used to investing. So someone like, for example, a qualified investor would be a venture capital fund. Certainly an accredited investor would be a minimum. But I think even a little bit more than that, you'd want to look at the track record of the individual to see that they have invested in entities, going forward. Can you change from an E2 to an EB5 green card? Absolutely. You can apply for an EB5 while on an E2. So that's and look at the webinar on E2 to green card. That's definitely very useful. If you're getting the investment over 1 million, how much would you expect to invest personally for E2? Unfortunately, I don't understand the question, so I'm going to move to the next one. Do you need to get vaccinated to get an E2? So you should check the vaccination requirements, but the US requires a vaccination for anyone who's on a visa to enter. And there are certain exemptions. One is a medical exemption, but that's definitely, you should check the CDC website. For the E2 visa, can the investment money come from US-based investor? Yes, it can. Yes, it can. Because the requirement for ownership is different from the requirement for investors. So the E2 person could maybe be an E2 employee if they weren't the ones investing. How long does it take to get an E2 visa? Depends on where you're applying. If you're applying in the US, you can pay the government $2,500 for premium processing. If you're applying at a consulate, then it's really just going to depend on the processing time of the consulate. Like Canada right now is taking about 6 months. London's taking about 6 months. How many real estate properties do you need for an E2? Probably at least 10 or so if you're doing like, flipping or something like that, but definitely more than one. And we have another webinar on high risk E2s where we talk about real estate investing in a lot more detail. If source of funds comes from a gift from a friend and they confirm it is a gift, will they look into it further? No, they will look into it further. So they have to provide the same documentation that you would provide as to where the money came from. So if it came from tax, savings, it would be tax returns, etc. What do you recommend when you are inadmissible to the US? Unfortunately, it's too, that there could be 5 webinars on inadmissibility. Apply for a waiver if you're eligible. For the E2 visa application, what are the job creation requirements? Should these need to be full? Yeah, so we went over this during the webinar. So definitely, just if you want to, look at the recording, and I think I did speak about that on a number of occasions. If you have a company and an E2 visa, can I still work as an employee for any of? No. So E2 visa allows you to work for the company that you have the E2 visa with. With the E2 visa, are you allowed to set up online courses serving US customers while waiting for the visa approval? If you're outside the US, that's no problem. If you're in the US and your business is setting up online courses, then that could be a problem. If here on E2, can you use the same business to apply for an EB5? Yes. So yes. Can you get an E2 for real estate that's not registered under the company? So there are, lots of people do get E2s for real estate companies. Can we employ a person as a sales representative by offering a commission on sale? And is that called? Yeah, that is employment generation. So that could be, that could assist. How long does it take to get an E2 visa if you pay the $2,500? If it's in the US, it's 2 weeks, so 15 days to pay the premium processing fee to the government. Can we travel to the US through visa waiver program while waiting for the E2 process to finalize? So I think traveling to the US on visa waiver while you're, doing the visa is fine, like getting everything ready. But if it's been submitted to the consulate, I wouldn't, because they may question why you're entering. Because when you submit it to the consulate, you're saying that everything is ready, the business is ready to start, right? So if you're coming to the US, they may think you're coming to work. If my company requires outside investment over $1 million in the near future to build a product, how much will I have to put in personally? Okay, so if it requires $1 million, then you probably, if you're the investor, if you're the E2 investor, you probably would want to put in 75% or something of that. But others can invest, and then you could be an E2 employee as long as you own 50% of the company. When applying for an E2 with USCIS, is the premium fee deductible? I'm not sure what you mean, but for taxes, I have no idea. E2 to EB5 with the same business, does this investment have to occur after applying for the EB5, or can it be prior, so long as you, so as long as you can prove the investment and it was a startup, like, so you didn't buy the business or whatever and give the money to the seller. But no, like we did a farm and went back 10 years and they made, investments over a 10-year period, and that's no problem to move to an EB5. It's quite a process, but it's doable. Example, a tech company that is developing a product, raising funding. Okay, my real estate properties are registered under my name. Can you apply to an E2 visa? I think I think it just depends. I think it depends. It's what are the total costs to get an E2 visa? So definitely send us an email, and we'll be happy to send you more on our fees to get an E2 visa. And then we're just finishing up the questions here. Okay, that's done. Yes, okay, that's done. Okay, for my E2, I'm planning to buy assets of a business that was started in 1988. How is this considered for EB5 purposes? It is my own entity is new. In that case, can the E2 purchase price qualify towards I think unfortunately it's too complicated of a question for me to answer right now, but I'd say that if you want to set up a consultation to do that, because the date is like it depends on the assets, and yeah, I think it's definitely worth setting up a consultation, but there's just a few things going on there that need explanation. Yeah, so in terms of a loan, if the loan, like I think going back to that other question a long time ago, if the loan came from another person, then and there was no collateral, then that would be fine. The only loan that's not permitted is a loan that is where the security is coming from. The security is business or business assets. Can you get a green card from an E2 visa? You can't get a green card from an E2 visa, but if you're eligible for a green card category, you can apply. When applying for an E2 with USCIS, is the premium fee deductible? But again, I'm not really sure what you're referring to by deductible. If you mean for tax purposes, I don't know. If you mean to include in the investment, then no, I wouldn't include the premium fee in the investment. Your investment should probably stand on its own in terms of sufficient without that fee. And so, okay, we have time for one or two more questions here. Okay, so, okay, as a Canadian, if we apply for an E2 with premium, where do we go for our interview, US or Canada? So the premium processing is only available for when you're doing the application in the US, so USCIS. So when you're applying for an E2 visa, there are two ways of applying. One is through USCIS if you're in the United States, which is not that common. It's only become common because of the long delays at consulates. And then the other way is applying it at a consulate. The reason most people apply at a consulate is because the consulate actually gives you the visa. And if you apply through USCIS, every time you left the US, you would have to go back to the consulate and get the visa anyway. So that's why people normally apply. So the only place that you can pay the $2,500 to get a faster answer is through the consulate. Is through USCIS. If you want to go to a consulate to actually get the visa, it's longer because of COVID. So Toronto is about 6 months. Can kids of an E2 visa study in US university? Yes, until they're 21. Is it a state resident or international? Okay, as Canadian, if we apply, okay, that's okay. Thank you, that's no problem. Okay, for E2, for a tutoring company, will contractors as employees be acceptable? Yeah, so there are definitely many businesses where contractors are fine for the purposes of job creation. It's wouldn't work for EB5, but for E2, definitely. Sometimes, we've done like, photographers, for example, where all of their kind of employees or staff are going to be contractors, and that's not a problem. If outside the US and doing some travel to US on visa waiver to set up the physical wellness center, would I put sakes, I'm not sure, but of online courses through the US business bank account, or in my home country, will the E2 application, while E2 application process, sales courses. So yeah, the question, I think there was a typo, so I'm having trouble reading it properly. If outside the US and doing some travel to the US on visa waiver to set up a physical wellness center, would I put, okay, sales courses, okay. Would I put sales courses through a US bank? I'm not, so unfortunately I don't understand the question. No, a lease is not a must. A lease is not a must. Like someone is asking, is a lease a must? It's not a must. It can help an application, but it's not a must. You definitely should have a website if you're applying for an E2. When you receive E2 visa, can your kids study in the U.S. university or state students or still international? Yeah, I think each school is going to have a different view on what they consider a resident. What I do know is that if your children are under 21, they do not require a separate visa to go to school. I'm in Australia, so I can't apply for the 2,500. No, you can't. And if you're Australian national as well, just so that you know, the fee, each country has a what's called a reciprocity fee for their E2 visa. And Australia had a significant jump in that fee when the last administration came in, so that for each person and their dependent, I believe the reciprocity fee is $3,600. So if you have a family of 4, it's 3,600 times 4 for them to issue the visa. So, and and it's not going to be any faster. There's no, at consulates, there's no premium processing. Oh, okay. So yeah. So the question about the deductible, the 2,500. The question is, if you premium processing, if you premium process, can you include the 2,500 in the investment amount? I would say no. USCIS is not going to consider that a valid investment amount. What happens to the child when they turn 21? They're just required to get another type of visa. Maybe they can go to an F visa or some other type of visa, but excellent. So I think that we're going to end it there. Definitely a lot of great questions. Definitely encourage you to, if you have additional questions, set up a consultation. We'd be happy to go through that with you. As I had mentioned before, we're going to send out a number of things to you. We're going to send you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. We're going to send you a link to the YouTube of this particular video, so you can catch up on anything that you perhaps missed. We're going to send you some E2 visa guide or guides in general: E2 visa, International Entrepreneur, EB5, and National Interest Waiver. We have 4 of those guides. We're going to send you a link to our guide page, so you can download those. And definitely with our YouTube channel, please feel free to subscribe. We regularly have videos that we issue, and you'll hit the subscribe notification button, and you'll get notified every time we get those videos up. Again, thank you very much. Great attendance and great questions. I see some questions are still coming through, but we do have to cut it off at some point. So appreciate your attendance and your participation. Thank you very much. Take care.